Hello friends, Judith Butler's argument has been explained to a in a general manner so far, and we would like to take up with Professor Payal Nagpal, presenting to us, the specific points about Judith Butler. So, and this time it's going to be a little more incisive, a little more realistic, a little more specific, and it will also entail a kind of discussion about the changes that might have occurred with interventions from the new activist feminist thinkers of the 1990s. So I request again Professor Payal Nagpal to kindly pursue it.
Thank you, Professor Prakash. So we were talking about the idea of the body that is brought to the center of the discussion around feminism, and how Butler displaces the established sex-gender discussion to make us think about it not in terms of these binaries, but the very constitution of these categories. And these categories then have to be understood, in a sense, from the viewpoint of the body itself. And this, in a sense, gives a new direction, really speaking, to the feminist field, because all existing discourses took the body as a given on which meaning is inscribed, whether through the idea of sex or culture. But the body itself did not have an active agency. If there is othering, there is multiplicity, but what about the process of embodiment itself? To understand this process of embodiment, we now move to Butler's discussion on the performative nature of gender. As mentioned, after discussing the entire Simone de Beauvoir, Luce Irigaray discussion, the question that is raised is that we need to then think of gender differently. So, Butler explains how the body often appears to be a kind of passive medium, on which things are inscribed. So, any theory of the culturally constructed body, however, ought to question the body as a construct of suspect generality when it is figured as passive and prior to discourse. So what Butler does is, Butler uses a Foucauldian paradigm to understand, and she calls this a siege of the body, almost as if the body is, under siege, and brings in Kristeva's idea of the abject. The abject is that which is expelled from the body and is defined as the other or the alien. So the body, and then the sheer body itself, its corporeality, its physical existence, maintains the tension between what lies inside the body and what is expelled outside the body as the other. And then the critical question that Butler states is not about how identity is internalized, but how the trope of interiority, how the idea of this binary between inner and outer, really speaking, has taken hold. So, to understand this in the context of performativity, I would quote Butler here. In other words, acts, gestures, and desire produce the effect of an internal core or substance, but produce this on the surface of the body through the play of signifying absences that suggest but never reveal the organizing principle of identity as a cause. Such acts, gestures, enactments, generally construed, are performative, in the sense that the essence or identity that they express are fabrications manufactured and sustained through corporeal signs and other discursive means. That the gendered body is performative suggests that it has no ontological status apart from the various acts which constitute its reality. So, to explain this, and in these lines, Butler has explained the idea, has put forth the idea of gender as performative. But before we understand gender as performative, there's another word that Butler uses, and that word is, in a sense, a key to understanding the performative aspect of gender, which is fabrication. Because according to Butler, whatever acts we perform, the gestures, the desire, all these are performed by the body, and they produce an effect on the body. And these are then, in a sense, they constitute, these are first of all fabricated, these are not a given. It is not as if there is a prescribed role that is to be performed. Instead, there are certain acts and gestures that are performed, and these, in a sense, lead to the gendered body as performative, which means that the body is, it does not have any other status, as Butler says, apart from the acts that constitute its reality. And this is, in a sense, it almost turns everything around, and it makes us understand now the field in terms of the acts that are performed, but these are acts that are fabrications that are manufactured and are sustained by the body. I'd request Professor Prakash to share his views on this idea of gender being understood in terms of certain acts that are performed. These acts are not prescribed acts, but these acts are fabrications, and of course, over a period of time, then these the word that Butler uses is sedimentation, that these acts and gestures kind of coalesce and sediment to give an idea of gender as a certain linear performance.
I think it's very well projected further in the context of the body, because the body is not passive, and the things defining the body are gesture and fabrication, as you say. That when you make a gesture, when you assert something, when you express an experience, then that experience also takes pressure from something else, and it reacts back, and that's how a kind of evolution occurs. So body is not passive and is not fixed and under attack from cultural norms, but that when you talk about experience, you talk about gestures, you talk about mental activity and alertness, which is fabrication, then you also give a kind of challenge to the existing orthodox and other norms, and then the body actually becomes a kind of a place that will react, because since it is active, and that the woman who is owning the body, that woman will take over, not as a being, but as a conscious person who will think, who will act, and who will then hit back. So that's a new concept about the idea of the body, and this is definitely Foucauldian in the sense that culture actually learns quite a bit from the experiences and the activities of the body, and this she exemplifies so well in her discussion.
And what Butler says is that this aspect of gender as the acts being a fabrication, the gestures being a fabrication, and how they sediment over a period of time, and they start indicating that this is what masculinity means and this is what femininity means. But what Butler says is that this aspect is always concealed. This performative nature is concealed. What we see is a performance, that this is how the male body or the female body performs. But this aspect, that these are actions, because if it is a fabrication, then it can also change. There can be another act.
Yes, definitely.
And that's where Butler brings in this idea of fluidity and says that it is concealed because this kind of a fluid identity is really speaking, it challenges the established notion of gender.
I was straight away thinking of the social scene in the different countries in the world in the context of such an idea, that when women become active, when they are on the stage of society as such, when they are taking things in their own hands and are challenging the established norms, then they become a talk of the town. Then they create controversies. Then they are being attacked. And in the attack, it is shown very clearly that women actually are posing a challenge to men. So the point about politics of this kind of an idea that you projected earlier, that becomes clear here. In the sense, that when you make a gesture, when for instance there is a kind of established cultural norm and you go against it by that gesture, by that act, by that fabrication, maybe it is just to tease the male psyche. All those things really help women to assert themselves in a counter way.
Yes. So I completely agree with that. So in a sense, we are always performing our gender, but actually this is a fabricated reality. So therefore, whatever we perform, as what we think is gender, it is a cultural inscription and so on, it is actually a fabrication.
Has it to do with the increased awareness among women all over the world that they are being taken as a threat today?
Certainly. And if we look at it historically, the way feminism has kind of progressed internationally, I think, if we look at, how the 70s, really speaking, with French feminism, the whole idea of the body becomes important. As we're moving into the 90s, we're also trying to understand how the body is contained by social discourse, how the society would like to contain it, and only look at it in terms of culture. And Butler's argument actually liberates, really speaking, the body, and also shows us how the idea of gender has to change. It can't be a very prescriptive form that is there. So these acts and these gestures, these enacted desires, they create an organizing core, and this, Butler says, is an illusion. And this illusion is important to create, to maintain, to sustain, because it allows sexuality to be regulated. Because if we go back, to the argument that we had started with, how Butler also challenges the idea of phallogocentrism. This is how it is done, because there is an illusion that is created that this is what a specific gender means. We would not like to see it as a fabrication. We would like to see it in the prescriptive form. And this illusion then it creates, it maintains, and it sustains the idea of sexuality, and of course in this case, a kind of compulsory role that the body is to perform.
So that which is illusion, that which is unreal, that which doesn't exist, is able to create a situation in which things start changing. So that there's a kind of a role of illusion that is being given by these thinkers.
No, in this case the illusion is sustaining the equations of power. The illusion is sustaining the way in which the body is supposed to perform its gender.
Okay.
And this idea of illusion, that it is an illusion, is concealed, is hidden. Because if it is understood as a fabrication, then the alternative to perform the gender differently is there. But by believing that this is how it is,
so illusion becomes real because you are hiding it.
Yes. So the acts, gestures, and the desires, they create what, over a period of time, the term that Butler uses is sedimentation. It creates a kind of organizing core, and this is, an illusion. So the body is at the center of things. Gender, in a sense, is, a performance of a certain kind within this idea of the illusion. And there is nothing like, a true gender. This can only be, what Butler says is that there cannot be a true gender. This idea is a fantasy within the problematic that Butler has, really speaking, drawn for us. And this makes space then for other sexualities, and in a sense the choice of sexuality, really speaking, to be there. Butler also refers to the idea of drag, the whole idea of the performance of the female by the male, to understand the idea of how acts and gestures are a performance of a certain kind. So Butler was, of course, greatly influenced here by Derrida's reading of Kafka, and Butler, explains how in this exaggeration, and of course this also takes one back to Shakespeare's time, when the young male actors would be performing the role of the women. But here in this case, when Butler uses the idea of drag, it is to understand how the act itself is a construction. Because when the male body performs the act of being a woman, be it through, using hair, by using exaggerated makeup and so on. So there is a certain kind of performance that is at work. And that is what Butler draws attention to, that how this is actually a construction in which the physical body is, of course, involved. So the notion of gender parody, and looks at drag as gender parody, defended here does not assume that there is an original, which such parodic identities imitate. Indeed, the parody is of the very notion of an original. So there is, in a sense, as Butler says, and this is where performativity becomes very important, because performativity shows how there are no fixed subject positions for any gender. It is through this repetitive act that certain positions are consolidated, and they give the illusion of a kind of original gender. So therefore the original gender identity is itself an imitation without an origin, and there is a displacement that is at work of the original identity, which creates a lot of space within the feminist field for fluid identities. So what then is gender is the next question. How then do we understand gender within the whole Butler problematic? So Butler says that consider gender, for instance, as a corporeal style, and the word corporeal again brings in the physical body. So bring as a corporeal style, an act, as it were, which is both intentional and performative, where performative suggests a dramatic and contingent construction of meaning. So this is how it is different from performance, because performance assumes that this is a specific position and you are going to perform in a certain way. But what Butler does is, Butler challenges this idea of performance through performativity by saying that first of all, gender is to be looked at as a corporeal style, which means that we are constantly performing our gender. There is no original. We are always performing the gender. And we are performing it on the basis of acts that we might have seen over a period of time. So, but the acts could also change because it's a fabrication. So, for instance, as a corporeal style, an act, as it were. Now, this act is intentional and it is performative, where there is a contingent construction of meaning.
Why am I feeling that you are bordering on, while discussing Judith Butler, the idea that Bertolt Brecht also held out in the 1950s and 60s, that it's drama, it is gesture, things are forming on the stage, they are also forming among the audience, and that in this throwing back of one against the other, then a kind of evolution occurs. So they seem to have been also constructed, as Brecht himself would say, around the idea of gender here.
So I'm so glad you asked this, because this was constantly playing at the back of my mind while we were talking about Butler's views, because I completely agree with you. Mm-hmm. There is a very integral connection, really speaking. For instance, what Brecht talks about, defamiliarization, making the familiar appear strange. Mm-hmm. And similarly, if we look at, because for Brecht, within epic theatre, the audience must pay attention, in a sense, to the gesture itself, for instance, to see how this is an act that is a kind of performance in society. Mm-hmm. And Butler, is by using performativity, is saying precisely the same thing, that gender is an act. And it is just that, because over a period of time, certain acts have been repeated. So we have started associating them with an original idea. But for Butler, this original idea is an illusion. So we need to actually understand this nature of these acts as a fabrication, which also, to my mind at least, it brings in the idea of choice. That if it is a construction, that I choose to perform an act, I can always choose to perform a different act, which means that one can always constitute one's gender in a different way.
The only difference would be, as you pointed out in the first part of the lecture, that Judith Butler is active in a post-structuralist world.
Yes.
Where everything that is there, a part of structure, is also thought from another angle, and that the whole thing is fluid. So fluidity and constant movement, constant change, and illusion, not being illusion and all those things, they seem to be influences of the post-structuralist period, which is the 1980s and 90s.
So it's interesting that here, when we discuss Butler is greatly influenced by the post-structuralist field, and Brecht too was probably struggling, at the time of high modernism, and trying to understand how the new aesthetics of the period would give him a chance to kind of express what he really speaking wanted to on stage. So two very, very different movements.
Would you like to make a general comment on the journey of feminism from the 18th century up to the present moment? Because this is the last lecture and you would like to comment on that, generalize.
Certainly. Certainly. I think one of the important things that I think covering this entire field, when we look at feminists of mid 18th century onwards and right through the 19th century, to the point I think where the struggle for vote begins, women are struggling against very, very powerful social institutions, especially that of marriage. And they are struggling, in a sense, to not only understand the way in which a patriarchal society works against their interests, but they're trying to also articulate their resistance. And by the time, I think, the first wave of feminism, and as women won the right to vote, it gave a major impetus, I think, to feminism in the 20th century. And from there, I think, to an understanding, in a sense, of second wave feminism, where the personal is political, was very, very important. Women's lives and their constitution of their lives in the social and political field was very important. And then 70s, we have French feminism and the body. And Judith Butler is interesting then because she uses performativity to, I think, in a sense, bring these different ideas, I think, are at work in her argument. When we look at the 1990s, I think these different ideas are really speaking at work, because it's very, very oriented, in a sense, towards an understanding of the way the society has projected gender in a certain manner. At the same time, using the French feminists, the whole idea of the body is central to her argument.
Where are we heading today as feminists in the first quarter of the 21st century?
I think today it's very important. The voices, I think, from India are very important. And when we talk about feminism in the context of India, I think we really speaking need to look at Indian and South Asian feminism and how that is introducing, really speaking, new concepts, new ways. They could be theoretical ways, they could be academically theoretical, but they are very, very oriented towards a practical understanding. I mean, Dalit feminism, for instance. So I think these are very important factors. I think women, in a sense, have a long history of feminism behind them, and it's now in a sense up to them to also, up to all of us, to really speaking, not just women, but also to look at society from the feminist point of view. I think that is very important.
Do you see a new hope in feminism in the third world countries?
Yes.
In the present context?
Yes, certainly. And especially Dalit feminism. I think that is very, very important.
Will education, new ideas, new conflicts in society, will they help this kind of feminism grow?
I think this constant struggle with one's immediate system is very important. To not be complacent, to constantly wrestle with these ideas and with daily life. It is easy to say, I think, that one is a feminist, but actually when one has to practice it on a daily basis, I think that is the challenge, to never lose sight of that. I think that's very important.
The life in the family, the life in neighborhood, the life on the streets.
So which is a daily challenge.
The daily challenge. Yes.
Which is why to be a feminist, it's very easy to state that, one is a feminist, but to actually put it into practice, I think that challenge is there.
And when you talk of the sections of society in the present time, and ethnicities and the tribal experience and regional experiences, and women being caught in the vortex of all these. So is that going to make a difference to the feminist thought?
It certainly will, because I think now feminist thought has evolved considerably. And if feminist thought is evolved, then it will take into consideration, the immediate social context. It will also take into consideration, for instance, the larger, geopolitical setup, the way in which, one belongs, in a sense, to a certain social context, and, to look at one as a part of a developing problematic. So I think all these factors are there.
And human social relationships vis-a-vis women would be redefined now?
I think they've already, they are constantly in a process of flux, they are constantly in a process of change, and that needs to be kept up. And that can only happen, I think, it's not as if it's something that is specific to the 21st century alone. I think 20th century onwards, there has been this very major impetus to, really speaking, challenge the structures that one is placed in.
And do you say that in the third world countries particularly, things at the moment exist at the level of perception, but the perception is radical? Or has it been articulated as a proper point?
I think it has been articulated. And that is why it's very important to actually look at the voices, let's say feminists from India. It's very important to look at these voices because it's not at the level of perception alone. Indian feminism, South Asian feminism is very, very articulate, and there is a need to engage with it.
Where are the texts? Are they there in short stories, poetry, drama, in the social discourse? Where are the texts?
The texts are all there. So texts from Seeing Like a Feminist, texts like Sharmila Rege's book on the testimonials of Dalit women. So I think the texts are all there now. Vrinda Nabar, I think, around the time that Butler was writing Caste as Woman. So there are a lot of books now that are there.
And academics too is changing to that extent?
Yes, yes.
It's not merely interest in studies, but studying specific things and negating others?
Yes. And understanding it. For instance, very important voices like, if you look at poetry by Sukirtharani or by short stories by Salma, I think they're very, very important. So the texts are certainly there.
Say for 2 minutes the conclusion regarding the entire course that we have done and you have been an important part of.
So I think it's very important that we use feminism to understand. It's important to use feminism to understand it not only at a theoretical academic level, but to understand it as praxis, to engage with it at the level of praxis, and so that it operates in a sense in a dialectical way where the praxis also allows us to formulate certain kinds of theories that would be specific, let's say, to third world countries, and to at the same time to engage with feminism as a historical field, to look at the work that has been done by feminists in the past. I think, for instance, in this entire series, a very valuable contribution has been the 19th century feminists to understand, what were the challenges that women were facing back then. Similarly, in the context of third world countries, what was happening in the 19th century? I think to write about these women, to actually articulate their points of view, is the road ahead, is the way ahead for us.
So friends, at the end of this lecture, we talk about the general points that have been made in the discussions on feminism in the course of time, which is quite long, and that feminism has come to stay. It is going to inform not merely relationships but also ideas and ideologies, and who knows, even political policies, because women are supposed to be now playing a more important political role in the culture, in the society of our time, and that the world is not going to remain the same as it has been for the last so many centuries. With this particular presentation by Professor Payal Nagpal, we come to the end of this discussion on Judith Butler and the stream to which she belongs to. And in the remaining lectures that will all happen in this month, we'll be touching upon these points still further. And till then, well, thanks Professor Payal Nagpal, and thank you listeners for your long patience, and I'm sure you would also be thinking about these questions in your own mind, and the more you think and the more you share with others, the more the prosperity of the feminist thought will grow in time. Thank you.